Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'm excited. I am excited. I'm excited about the future of work. I am excited about the panel that we have assembled before you. This is our second year hosting this session, and we were fortunate that we even got to have not just a big shout out, but a whole 20 minutes, half an hour on the Joe Madison show this week, because this was such an area of interest. And one of the things that he wanted to highlight is how significant the work of the Congressional Black Caucus is. Sometimes people think about just the social aspects of it, but there are serious deliberations and information and connecting that is happening. And so we are very excited to be here. I'm Lisa Blunt Rochester. I represent the great state of Delaware. Woo! Yeah, Delaware. Somebody said we're tiny but mighty. And I am just happy to be here. Some of you know I served in Delaware as our Secretary of Labor and also Head of State Personnel, and after that, CEO of the Urban League. And so jobs have always been a part of my DNA. My parents will tell you, my first job, I said to my dad when I was, 14, I said, I want a telephone in my room. And he said, well, go get a job. And that's what I did. I went to McDonald's and I got a job. And so I've been working ever since. And when I thought about this issue of the future of work, I thought about the fact that so many people are either real optimistic or very pessimistic, concerned that jobs won't exist that exist now. And some of that is true. We have shifted from an agrarian economy to a manufacturing economy, digital economy, and right now, we're not really talking about the future of work, we're talking about what's happening right now. You know, as I shared with some of you, we don't buy our books the same way that we used to all the time. Many of us, how many in here go on Amazon or have a Kindle, or how many in here, I know you do, Dad. Raise your hand. Travel. You know, I have a really good friend in the audience as well. We used to go to a travel agent to book our trips. Now I go on all these different sites. Matter of fact, all of those sites are competing against each other. Travel is different. Banking is different. You know, we walk up to an ATM now. My mom just called it a Mac machine the other day. That's how far back we go with this technology. But it's happening now. And unless you live in New Jersey, you don't have a person pumping your gas either. It's a new day. And so what we wanted to do was have a panel of experts to talk to you both about the trends and about the exciting things to come, but also about some practical on-the-ground things that are happening. Private sector, public sector, nonprofit. And so that's really what this session will be about. I will introduce the panelists, but before I do, I want to have him come up and say a few words. Our ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee, on which I serve, please welcome Congressman Bobby Scott from the great state of Virginia. A true leader, a true leader.
Thank you, Lisa. And this is towards the end of a great weekend where we've had a lot of really substantive workshops, and this is one of the most important, because if you talk about the future of work, what are people going to be doing in the future for their livelihood? This is not a new concept. In the March on Washington, they talked about automation adversely affecting the minority community. And so we've been dealing with this for a long time. Back in the March on Washington, we had good jobs like telephone operator. You know, some of y'all old enough to know what,
switchboard?
what a switchboard looks like. Mentioned ATMs. Used to have to go to the bank every week to have a teller cash your paycheck. You've got go to the airport to get checked in. Now you check yourself in. All of these good paying jobs no longer exist. If you some of the industries that are going out and coming back in, like steel, but when they come back in, there's so much automation that you need only a fraction of the people you used to need to produce the same amount of steel. And if there's any question about how bad this situation is, the Joint Center has statistics that'll scare us to death, that we really gotta know what we're doing and really prepare. Education is going to be one of them. When people, when these jobs are available, we're going to have to know how to perform on those jobs. And if you don't have a good education, you're going to be left out. There's another aspect of this, and that's the idea that you can sign up, go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning, work 8 hours, go home, and have somebody pay you for what you did without any entrepreneurial activity, without having to sell yourself. There's a website, I forget the name of it, where you can just advertise your wares. If you're an accountant, you can advertise your services, some nice things said about you and your hourly rate, and you can be anywhere. You can be,
There you go.
say again?
Fiverr.
Fiverr? Fiverr.
Yeah. Like
And you can be anywhere. People can send send all the receipts in a box, or FedEx it, or fax it or something. You can do the tax return and then email the tax return back. You can be working in St. Louis and have a nice clientele here in Washington, D.C. So if you're an accountant in Washington, D.C., all of a sudden, all your clients left. If you're not out there selling yourself, you're going to be left out. All the gig economy, Uber and everything else is, there's so much change in the workforce that if we're not prepared, a lot of people are going to be hurt. And this is a kind of workshop that is so important to African Americans. And Lisa has been using her background in Urban League and Department of Labor in Delaware to make sure that we are not left behind. And that's why, Lisa, it's so valuable for you to have this kind of workshop. And thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. You know, the word left behind, I think that really was the thing that inspired me to want to do this session. As members of the CBC, we get an opportunity to pick an area that you want to focus on. And, you know, we always talk about when America gets a cold, black people get pneumonia.
Right, right.
And one of the concerns I had was for people of color to not be left behind.
Right.
And that instead of us being fearful, that we be prepared, that we lean in, that we leverage our resources, and that we plan and know. And so that's why your presence here today is so important. No matter what area you represent, your presence here is so important because this is an all hands on deck moment, and it cuts across party lines. This is something that we should be able to come together on, whether you're Democrat or Republican, because it affects all of us. And so many of you know when I talk about left behind, I also think about people who are coming out of prison. When I was running, one of the people who approached me on a park bench said that he had been afraid because he didn't know what kind of job he was going to have. And so our veterans, people with disabilities, people of color, we don't want to be left behind. And so today is about moving forward. We are very excited about the panel that we have before you. We're looking at the word cloud. It's still moving around, so get your word in if you have it. In one word, describe how you feel the future of work will impact communities of color. We did this last year, and at the end, you will put in one word as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our incredible panel. And I'm going to start off with Alistair Fitzpaine, the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's Future of Work Initiative. They are world renowned as a think tank. He laughed, but it's true. It is very true. And Alistair himself is a veteran of the Obama administration. He served in a number of senior roles at both the Department of Treasury and the Department of Health and Human Services. He also served in the offices of Senator Bai and Rep. Rahm Emanuel. Alistair has a BA from Vassar and a MPP, I'm assuming that's a Master's of Public Policy?
Correct.
Okay, MPP from the University of California, Berkeley. Please give him a round of applause. Not yet. I'm going to introduce him. Yeah. Next, we have with us Chanel Hardy, who serves as the Strategic Outreach and External Partnerships Director for Google. Chanel is an attorney and public policy expert who has focused her efforts on policies dealing with economic growth, opportunity, and justice. Chanel has served as Chief of Staff to the FCC, Commissioner Clyburn, along with being Chief of Staff to former Congressman Arthur Davis. Please give her a round of applause. And next we have Dr. Janice Nevin from Christiana Care Health System from Delaware, one of our fellow Delawareans. It gives me great joy to welcome her. She is the president and CEO of Christiana Care Health System, and she has been leading efforts in cutting-edge medicine. I recently had the pleasure of touring their innovation center, and they are doing phenomenal things. And one of the reasons she was invited was because not only are they doing phenomenal things by way of medicine, but also by way of workforce. Next, and she also is a person who believes in joy and love, and that's me
important.
too. So I think that's a shout out. It's actually part of their mission as a healthcare system. And next we have Marie Hocker from Ford Motor Company. Marie serves as the manager for U.S. government relations for the Ford Motor Company. And prior to joining Ford, she served as the education and transportation staffer for Senator Debbie Stabenow. Marie has focused on Ford's policy priorities to improve transportation infrastructure and workforce development. And she's also part of a coalition. It's actually called the Partnership for Transportation, Innovation, and Opportunity. And so that's all of these groups like Lyft and Uber and Toyota and other partners that are dealing with transportation. As we're talking about autonomous vehicles, that's going to have an impact on all of us, both from a workforce perspective and also how we live and play. And last but not least, yes, for Marie, yes. And last but not least, we have with us again, joining us again, Spencer Overton, who is the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. In addition to overseeing the Joint Center, which produces reports and surveys and policy briefs and videos on the future of work affecting people of color, Spencer serves as a tenured professor of law at George Washington University. Washington University. He is also a distinguished alum of the Obama administration. And Spencer will actually be moderating our panel. But again, before I have him come up, I again just want to stress that when I hear of the terms machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of big data, it's going to have an impact on us. It's impacting us now. And so we are happy that you are in here. It's interesting, the big word right now, I don't know if any other people are going to put in new words, but the big word now is opportunity. So with that, I'm going to start off with Spencer and have him come and moderate our panel.
So we are incredibly fortunate. And we're fortunate because Congresswoman Blunt Rochester is on this issue here, right? She mentioned she was, the Secretary of Labor in terms of Delaware, National Urban League CEO, and really focused on how do we help folks who might be on public assistance or returning citizens, right, get into jobs, and also certainly the work part, but also thinking forward in the future, what's emerging here. So obviously smart, visionary, energy, we need the energy, right, in terms of being optimistic about embracing the future. So we're just fortunate. So again, thank you very, very much. So now we're focused on what's next. The Joint Center did a study, found that 27% of black workers are concentrated in just 30 jobs at high risk to automation. And the question is, how do we ensure, as we're making these labor transitions, how do we ensure racial equity is baked into the design here, and that's not just forgotten in terms of the big picture. But then also in terms of as a community, how do we take agency, right, to get new jobs, to be on the forefront. I've mentioned this before, Hidden Figures is just inspiring in terms of the women mathematicians realizing the IBM was coming, right? And going out, learning skills, developing skills, and again, she didn't just learn it for herself, she taught her group, right? And then when that IBM came, they were ready to go, right? And so how do we do that? How do we ensure that, you know, challenged neighborhoods in Wilmington and Gary, Indiana, and Baltimore can become Wakanda, and that's not just a pipe dream, right? Folks in Singapore and Rwanda and Estonia and South Korea, these are places that in 20 years have just transformed themselves, right? There's no reason that we can't do that. It's not beyond our capacity. We've done a lot. We can do it here, right? So now we're going to start, and we're going to get some of these answers from Al Fitzpaine in terms of where we're going, and then we'll hear from our other panelists. Al?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I do a lot of panels. This, I think, is my favorite one, partly because nobody has more energy on a Saturday morning than Congressman Chester. And so I do want to thank her for the invitation. I was here last year. It's great to be back. I also want to thank her staff for all the work that they have done to organize this event. And I also want to say it's an honor to be here alongside such a distinguished group of panelists. I'm going to do a little bit of history, actually, before I do the future. I think there's an important saying, you know, if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're condemned to, repeat the failures. So I think it's worth taking a look back a little bit before we jump forward. Let's see if that works. I might need some technical assistance here in terms of, oh, I got it. I figured it out. Future work. So this week marked the 10-year anniversary of the financial crisis. An anniversary I don't think we want to celebrate, but one that does allow us to look at what's happened over the last 10 years and evaluate how the recovery has affected our country. And our economy has been resilient. We've experienced 102 months of consecutive job growth, which we read about in the paper all the time, created nearly 20 million jobs, again, over the last 10 years, and that receives a lot of attention. But I think an important story that does not receive the same amount of attention is that most of the new jobs, the 20 million that have been created, have been in low-wage occupations. And what this slide shows, and it's a little, I apologize, it's a little hard to follow, but it shows there's 800 occupations that the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks. And as you can see, the concentration of those occupations on the left-hand side are occupations where you earn less than $50,000. And if you look from the bottom to the top, what that is showing you is the number of jobs that have been created. And so effectively you're seeing on the bottom line of this chart is that 3/4 of US jobs created since the financial crisis pay less than middle class income. In other words, our economy is creating jobs, but not enough well-paying middle class jobs. So, and so to further illustrate that job growth isn't translating into higher paychecks, this slide looks back 20 years and shows that household income hasn't budged. As you can see, household income has increased since the financial crisis, but all that we have done is simply regain our losses. And again, while the press coverage focuses on job growth and the economy and GDP, and this week's focused on how median household income hit an all-time high, I think the more accurate picture is that we are simply treading water. And another area that gets a lot of attention, and I think is again a history lesson for us going forward. long-term decline of manufacturing jobs in the U.S., again, is well known, I'm sure, by everybody in this audience. And again, this slide just shows what you already know, which is over the last 30 years, as our economy has continued to transition to a service economy, we've gone from a manufacturing sector that was 20%. 1 out of every 5 workers in our economy worked in manufacturing. And now that has gone down to 9%. And that's automation, that's globalization, these trends that both the Congresswoman and Spencer are talking about that are about to be turbocharged. And the point I'd make here is that we have lost. And again, Congressman Scott said this well as well. We've lost stable employment with good benefits that gave people pathways into the middle class, and you did not need a college degree. You could be at college, you could have a high school degree, you could get into a pathway that gave you the opportunity to go to middle class. And as you can see from the decline of just the manufacturing industry, and there's a number of industries that we'll talk about in the future that are going to be potentially facing similar dynamics that the manufacturing industry faced. So you can see the impact that it had. So what are the central challenges going forward? How do we learn from history and hopefully adjust our policy accordingly? So just to talk about the challenges. One major challenge for policymakers is the fraying relationship between employers and employees. And the days of finishing school at age 18 or 21 and going to work at a company and working at that company for your entire career, those days are over. More Americans are now working as part of what we call the independent workforce. And the latest estimates show, that's the top bar here, is that 1/3, 1 out of every 3 members of our workforce is earning income now through independent work. Now, what do I mean by independent work? These are workers that do not work for traditional employers. So we're talking about independent contractors, freelancers, solo entrepreneurs, but also contract employees, where you are a subcontractor to a company where you provide, you can be a security guard, you can provide food service, but you don't work directly for the company where you're spending all your time. And this presents real challenges because we've built our 20th century social contract around employers. We rely on employers to provide critical benefits like healthcare, retirement, paid leave. We've also structured key worker protections around employers. Minimum wage protections, overtime protections, right to organize, anti-harassment, discrimination protections. Those are all available to employees, but they're not available to independent contractors. By contrast, independent workers have less access to healthcare, less access to retirement, and no access to the critical protections I've just described. They often experience higher degrees of income volatility, face a needlessly complex tax filing system, and have more difficulty saving for the future. An even greater challenge, and I'm sure we'll probably focus on this area, is the impact of technology and automation. And I'll just echo what the Congresswoman said. Spencer has done groundbreaking work in this area, talking about the impact on communities of color. I look forward to kind of hearing more of his thoughts, but I'll just make a couple basic points. Automation will have its most severe impact on routine and predictable jobs. And those jobs are clustered in areas such as retail, food service, and warehousing. Now, the slide just shows 2 pictures. I was thinking about putting a whole bunch of stats in here, but I just wanted to show 2 pictures. One on the left is just a self-service kiosk that you now found at McDonald's. It's interesting to hear the Congresswoman talk about her experience working there.
Yeah.
So by 2020, now in less than 2 years, McDonald's expects to convert from cashiers to self-service kiosks in half of their stores. So 8,000 to 9,000 stores across the country will now have self-service kiosks. More broadly, we have 3 million cashiers in our economy. So this isn't something that's specific to fast food. You're going to have 3 million cashiers that potentially going to have to transition to new jobs. Picture is the same in e-commerce warehouses that rely almost entirely on robots and automation instead of human workers. The photo on the right is just a photo of a JD.com warehouse that's actually in China. The warehouse packs, just listen to, the warehouse packs and ships 200,000 boxes every day. And there are only 4 human employees that work at the entire facility. Only 4. Now, while China is moving faster than the US when it comes to automating work, if you look at an Amazon warehouse, they're not far behind, right? So we are just kind of looking at where we are heading when it comes to warehouse. Now, Amazon hires 500,000 people. So again, think about the potential impact. The question is, what skills? What skills will workers like cashiers and warehouse workers that are disrupted by automation need to find new work? And what we have seen, and will continue to see, is that there are specific skills that employers are seeking. And that if workers have those skills, it can increase the opportunity to obtain a middle-class job. And just look at digital skills as an example. The share of jobs that requiring high digital skills has increased to nearly 1 out of 4 jobs. And while the share of jobs requiring low digital skills has fallen by nearly 30%. So you're seeing a dramatic shift there. And more importantly, if you have a job that requires digital skills, as opposed to the ones that doesn't, it gives you a 17% pay premium. And according to Burning Glass, the labor market analytics firm in Boston, middle-skilled jobs that require digital skills average $20 per hour. So you're getting a good paying job. So given these trends, what can we expect in our labor market? And this chart should kind of, again, raise concerns. It shows that over the next, this is a projection done by the Department of Labor about where our economy is heading over the next 10 years, right? Where they're looking at every occupation in our economy. And what it's showing you is that absent policy intervention, the polarization of our workforce, the increase in low-wage jobs and high-wage jobs, but the hollowing out of the middle is going to continue to increase. And that is, in my mind, the encapsulation of the challenge we face. What can we do? The good news is that in the absence of federal action, we are seeing lots of innovative work in the private and the nonprofit sectors. As the slide shows, companies are developing new types of training programs. Amazon, AT&T, IBM, Starbucks, Walmart, all on the front lines of helping their workers obtain 21st century skills, and I'm sure there's good examples at Ford as well. Universities, Arizona State and Northeastern, I highlighted too, I could do a lot more, on the cutting edge of online learning and linking education in the classroom to real-world work experience, which is critical. And non-traditional education providers, Year Up, Tech Hire, Credential Engine. If you don't know these organizations, you really should. They are, again, on the front lines of innovative thought in these areas. And they're helping people obtain 21st century skills and encouraging employers to look past whether someone simply has a college degree, which is another critical component of what we need to address in the future of work. And while these efforts are noteworthy, the question remains, and I think is another critical question, what can be scaled? It's great that Amazon has a training program. That doesn't help everybody who doesn't work at Amazon. And what this slide highlights is the United States, I think I talked about this last year, spends very little on worker training. 0.03% of its GDP on workforce training. We lag almost every other major country. And while there has been a little momentum, there's been some conversation around apprenticeships and modifying Pell Grants, we are still way behind the rest of the world. Spencer gave a number of good examples about other countries that are way ahead of us in terms of understanding the problem and investing in workers. What about the states? Fortunately, we are seeing interesting examples of innovation from both Democrats and Republicans. This slide highlights 3 examples that I'll go through quickly. Tennessee, Republican governor, has made going to community college tuition free. Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper, a Democrat, has been a leader in developing an innovative program to build a skills-based as opposed to a credential-based labor market. Indiana, Republican governor, they have provided free statewide training in high-paying, in-demand industries. Again, all models that the federal government could take a look at. So what's next? I think as we head 2018 into 2020, we're going to hear a lot of big ideas. We're going to hear about universal basic income. We're going to hear about federal job guarantees. And that debate is going to be important. But I'd argue it's almost more important to follow what the states, the private sector, the nonprofit sector is doing to evaluate what is working and what is not working. And we are fortunate, I'll close here, to have members of Congress like Congressman Blunt Rochester, that are solutions focused, open to working with both sides of the aisle, and using their platforms to evaluate what's working and then use that as a model to eventually get us to take this problem with the appropriate seriousness, and again, figure out solutions that are going to help all American workers. Thank you so much.
I thought I would start out with just a little video. I did not do slides, but I thought I'd do something to keep you awake on in the morning.
Advice would you give to people just starting out?
I would say do not wait for a perfect moment. You have so many tools at your fingertips. Just go for it.
My dad had to close the doors of the family bakery, and I wanted to rebuild that business. But in order to make this thing last, I had to learn about some of the things my dad didn't have.
Our kids bought us a quilt machine and asked me if I wanted to do tutorials, and I was like, sure, honey, what's a tutorial?
Now we're 300,000 subscribers. I had some experience in computers, but what I needed was a direction.
I took a class that taught me the basics of how to get the business online. That was where I started reimagining myself. I'm an entrepreneur. I can do this.
Whether you're a teacher, a business owner, or just want to take the next step in your career, you can find free tools and training to grow your skills at google.com/grow.
Yay! Short and sweet, short and sweet.
I will try not to repeat too many of the points that Al raised, but I will speak from kind of two perspectives. One, you might have seen on your chair, and if you didn't get it, I forgot to bring my prop with me. This report, Opportunity for Everyone. Google released this earlier this year, actually, at the Aspen Institute Ideas Festival, and so we have more, and we'll make sure that you get a copy if you would like one. So I'll speak a little bit about what's in that report, but also my role at Google is to lead our partnerships with national advocacy organizations that represent multicultural communities. And so one of the parts of my resume that the Congressman didn't share, but that we have in common, is that I actually ran the Policy Institute for the National Urban League for 5 years. And so as I bring that background and continue to partner with organizations like that, there's also some additional insights, of course, that we are currently absorbing and trying to learn from and apply. So just broadly, obviously, as a technology and innovation-focused company, we don't see the future as binary. We don't either see it as terrifying or as utopia. And we do recognize that a lot of the excitement and ideas that we have about the future are not happening in a static environment where we have overcome, so to speak, right? We are coming into a situation that is already particularly challenging for our communities, as you just heard outlined. And so we need to, more than ever, have the conversation about racial equity if we're going to be able to make these really exciting, I think, options and opportunities work for all of us. I think as we see some of the things that give us excitement, and they're kind of to give color a bit to what Al talked about, I'll use ride sharing as an example. Right? We know, I don't know if you've seen recent reports, there have been a couple recently showing that while there is still a disparity in what happens in your rider experience with ride-sharing vehicles, it is dramatically lessened than with traditional taxi cabs even today. So this is an important technological solution to the indignity and just economic issues and timing issues of trying to hail a cab while black. It's solving a problem, but it's also raising some of the challenges that you've just heard described in terms of the experience of the drivers. We also recognize that the tech sector, our company included, is not near where we need to be in terms of the diversity of our workforce. And so as we're thinking about how we develop solutions that will be broadly applicable, we are very, very intentional about trying to make a real difference here. Earlier this year, we had our Vice President of Equity, Diversity, Integrity, and inclusion in town to meet with members of the Congressional Black Caucus and other leadership groups to really talk about how we are tackling the intersectional data, what's happening with Black women and Black men, not just the Black community as a whole, how we're trying to keep people there, not just increase our recruiting and hiring efforts, which we've been doing, but making sure that once we bring people in, we can keep them. So obviously our sweet spot in this conversation, we are not experts on social safety net policy, but we are experts on innovation, and we're experts on making the information accessible and useful. So we're really looking at questions on how we can use new technology to help employees and economic well-being, and we're also making investments. So part of why I wanted to show that video is that's a very small clip about our program Grow with Google that we announced at the end of last year. So that just gives you a sense of how fresh this thinking is in our company. And that was a $1 billion commitment over 5 years to try to play a piece of our part in really helping our global community to prepare for the future. And some of the investments that we've made so far include the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is very much focused on helping those independent workers. You think about domestic workers, right? It's a sole proprietorship type of business by its very nature. So how do we empower them with the tools to address their economic well-being? The African American Mayors Association as well is working on some research along with Spencer at the Joint Center, who have been really leading the charge in terms of really talking about the specific impacts for our communities and what will work. And then of course you already heard about Goodwill, the National Association of Latino Appointed and Elected Officials. And one report that I'll also mention that was released by an organization that we support this week called Full Color Future is called The Future of the Internet. That just came out on Wednesday, and you can get that at fullcolorfuture.com. And so that will go to my first important recommendation that I think still deserves a lot more thought, which is broadband. We still have a lot of communities with people like us that don't have broadband. I'm not talking about good broadband. I'm talking about any. So one of the programs that we launched this year that I'm proud of is called the Rolling Study Halls. And in South Carolina, rural South Carolina, one of the poorest areas in the country, we found that students were literally riding to school for 2 hours one way. And these students were in areas that were very, very rural and so did not have any access to broadband. And so we try to pilot putting high-speed hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots on the buses so that students could use the internet. Realized that we would obviously get more out of that if we put a teacher on the bus. I know you're not surprised to know that test scores went up and really made use of that time. And so we've now been rolling that out across several states across the country and are committed to continuing to grow that. But I would say, this is something that we need to continue to talk about as we get excited about kind of going deeper with broadband in areas that already have it. We need to remember those areas that don't, and the importance of having broadband at home. And then the next is really going beyond code and computer science education. I'll tell you, as someone who leads partnerships for multicultural communities, not a day goes by that I don't receive 5 requests to support a coding program. And that is great, but there are additional things that we can be thinking about, particularly when we're talking about that middle class level job that Al was talking about. And this is really about thinking about skills beyond the 4-year degree. So an example here is our IT certification program. We supported an online learning program called Coursera, don't know if any of you have heard of it, to launch the IT support certificate. What is valuable about this and why it's a model that we're not the only ones to be doing something like this. You can teach yourself how to be an IT support technician for a company. When you get the certification, you can opt in to share that certification in your resume with a consortium of employers that have agreed to recognize it. And that makes you competitive for a job that does not require a college degree, but does earn around $60,000 a year. And that's the type of model that we want to see continue to innovate, iterate, and grow. Also placing greater importance on so-called soft skills. And this one I really like. One of my colleagues, Judson Robinson from the Houston Urban League is here. And we talk a lot in the Urban League movement about soft skills. But what we're recognizing increasingly is that these skills aren't really soft. They're just a different type of skill that is extremely important. And so we've been funding important work to actually do certifications for these types of skills as well. And then, as Al mentioned, it is critically important that we update our financial aid system to fund these types of innovative programs. Second, we need to look beyond Silicon Valley to address entrepreneurship and job mobility. So one of the things that excites me about the internet in our community is the rise of entrepreneurship, the way that digital marketing and things like that have been able to help people to grow their businesses. But there is a need for a lot more training. And so we've got some great models. I'm just going to, for the sake of time, kind of move a little bit more quickly. And then we need to think about some existing barriers. So one of my favorite short examples of this is when we talk about occupational licensing. A lot of us think that this is a net benefit, and sometimes it is, but who knows the story of why barbers have licenses? Because during the Great Migration, there was such a disproportionate number of black men who were barbers that it was like, what can we do to create some equity, I guess I'll say, in the system, right? So you think about why would you need to have literacy skills? But that was part of what was required. So we were really looking at what are innovative ways that we can make sure that there's not unnecessary barriers. This is really important for returning citizens as well, who are unnecessarily locked out of jobs. And then finally, just really updating the social safety net. The current safety net is just not designed, as you heard, to really reflect the nature of the current economy. And so we really want to see changes there. And then just doubling down on things that do work, like the earned income tax credit. So I'm going to close and just say, I think what I find inspiring and the opportunity of the moment is that it's not too late to be cutting edge, right? This process, as you hear, we're still new, these projects are still new, this funding is still new. It's time for us to get really serious about it, but we don't have to already feel defeated that the ship has sailed. It has not sailed yet. There's still time for leadership and for innovation, and so I hope to talk to and work with many of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chanel. Dr. Nevin?
Thanks.
Well, good morning. And thank you so much, Congresswoman, for having me here. It really is an honor to be with you and the panel and everyone who is here today talking about something very important. For those of you who may not be familiar with Christiana Care, we are the largest healthcare provider in Delaware and a leading provider in the region. We've been around for more than 100 years, and we also serve as the largest private employer in the state of Delaware with almost 12,000 employees who we call caregivers. So, we have a fairly simple mission. We take care of people, and our goal is to help people achieve the outcomes in terms of quality of life that are important to them, and to do it in a way that makes care affordable. So we talk about how do we move from being hospital system to health system to being a system that truly impacts the health of all of the people who live in the communities that we serve. And we know if we're going to be successful, that we're not going to be able to solve today's issues with yesterday's solutions. We need to create tomorrow's solutions. So as a health system, we've even talked about, in 2025, will we be a data company that happens to deliver health? And what would that look like? We know that we can't deliver on our promise to our community without our extraordinary people. And I think often when people think healthcare, we go immediately to doctors and nurses and therapists. But increasingly, in order for us to be successful, it includes software developers, IT security folks, data scientists, and technicians, transportation, people who manage materials. So the world of work in healthcare is becoming very different. So you probably recognize this person, right?
Some of them.
Yeah, some do. But I think, even if you don't know who exactly that is, it's Marcus Welby. When people think about a physician, we tend to sort of conjure up the image of someone in a white coat with a stethoscope and a black bag. This looks very different. So this is one of our physicians. She is wearing Google glasses that have software embedded in them, which allow her to actually see the electronic health record in the glass and then transmit what happens to someone who's scribing remotely. So it allows her to look at the patient, not look at the computer, and to ensure that all of that data gets received. I think once natural language processing gets up to speed in terms of what we need in healthcare, we won't even need a person remotely scribing. Anybody know what this is? This is a stethoscope.
Oh.
So this is a stethoscope that you can put on your chest, or someone could put on your chest, and it transmits your data, again, back to a central data repository that can interpret your heart rate, your heart rhythm, and if necessary, send an alert so that if you're in trouble, somebody can come and help you. Almost everyone probably has one of these. This has something on the back. It's an EKG machine. You guys are great. The Apple Watch. I bet there are a lot of folks with Apple Watches. This little patch here is a cardiac monitor. And in fact, I think the new Apple 4 actually has it built in. This little device, again, you put your thumb, it will take your temperature, do your heart rate, and measure your oxygen. So when you start to think about, what's possible when it comes to how we are delivering health care, it really starts to change how we think about the workforce. The other thing that, Marcus Welby was known for was house calls. So again, as we think about the future, well, this is a little bit of a, sort of back to the future, but, I think that the only way that we're going to be able to get to value is if we do more and more care in the home and in the community and less care in the emergency department and in the hospital, because it's expensive. And if you're coming to the ED, you're sick. And there was probably something that we could have done before you got there. But we're doing house calls now using technology. So we can deploy technology to the home, as I've demonstrated, and bring a provider, a social worker, a clinical pharmacist, a physician, a behavioral health therapist, into the home, into an office for a rural practice, and actually start to deliver care and have it impact in ways that we really couldn't before. At Christiana Care, we have developed something called CareLink Care Now, and this is where the data goes. And when we originally developed this, it was developing a data platform so that we could aggregate data, use predictive analytics, refine protocols using artificial intelligence, and send alerts to a virtual care team so they could work with a patient or a physician and ultimately change the trajectory of care. What's happened, however, is it's evolved into a virtual care platform. And so the interdisciplinary team, and I mentioned some of the disciplines that are the people, are now really deploying care, using the kind of technology that I've shown you, using iPads, so that we're starting increasingly to think about this as a way to deliver care differently. And this fall, we will launch for our caregivers as a sort of a test program, a virtual primary care practice. So their primary care medical home will actually be virtual, and their care will happen through their phone. And we will send them when they need hands-on. We can send them to a particular location, but most of the care will be done virtually. And we really think again that it will allow us to deliver value. But think about how that changes work, and think about the different kinds of skills that we will need in healthcare. This is an example of one of our CareLink Care Now caregivers, and again, it's about the data skills. I'm going to close with just one more example. At Christiana Care, we have an NCI-designated community cancer center that has the only gene editing institute in the country embedded in it. We're one of a kind. You may have heard of CRISPR technology. It is, I think it will do for treatment, particularly for cancer, what antibiotics have done in healthcare. And so we are leading the way when it comes to that.
Stop there for a minute and just tell people the significance of CRISPR, because this is something that impacts health, agriculture, just...
Right. So it's, I am definitely not an expert on this, but it essentially allows the scientists to cut pieces of DNA and genetic material and use them differently to treat, say, cancer. So one of the things that we have just, the FDA, I think, is in the process of approving for us is something that would be added to lung cancer treatment that will mean that patients will require less chemotherapy, so less
this is important.
harm to, less side effects, less harm. I think ultimately it's technology that has the potential to actually cure something like lung cancer. It is the future. So what we did is partnered with our community college, and we created a curriculum to teach students how to do the CRISPR technology, so new lab skills. And it was enormously successful. Again, I think the first of its kind in the country. We've deployed that curriculum into some of the high schools, and the Franklin Institute picked it up also. So another example of sort of some of the new kind of work where I think there's a tremendous opportunity. And I'm out of time, so I'll talk about some of the other things when we get to our Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Nevin. And we've got now Marie Hocker, who's at the Ford Motor Company.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, I just want to thank you sincerely for the opportunity to participate on this panel. So I do not have any slides today. I'm just going to talk to you because I'm here to talk about something that there's a lot of buzz about it, and it's called autonomous vehicles. How many of you have heard of that thing? About autonomous vehicles.
Driverless cars and trucks.
Driverless cars and
buses
trucks. Correct. So I really want to talk to you a bit about the future of work, specifically as it relates to autonomous vehicles. And first I'll start off by sharing that Ford really does see tremendous opportunity enabled by the safe deployment of autonomous vehicles. And I want to really underscore to you safe deployment. That is absolutely number one. You will not see any fully autonomous vehicles on the road until we validate the safety of these products. So while there are many potential benefits of autonomous vehicles, for example, we imagine that there will be a reduction in congestion. There will also be a reduction in traffic fatalities. You all may be aware that at this rate, currently we're losing about 40,000 people on the roads every year in traffic accidents. 94% of those accidents are as a result of human error. So we do believe that autonomous vehicles have a role to play in reducing those rates. But that being said, it's really important to us that we need to take a holistic approach. We don't just want to tell you about the benefits, We want to acknowledge that there will be challenges along the way. And one of those challenges that we believe we're going to see is there will be workforce transitions. So my dad actually, he was a taxi cab driver at one point in his life. You all may have some cousins, you all may have close family friends, constituents in your community that are asking the same question: what's going to happen to my job? And how am I going to procure a livelihood for my family? So that is exactly why Ford, Waymo, Toyota, Daimler, Lyft, FedEx, Uber, and the American Trucking Association, we decided that we were going to bring our collective resources and our thought leadership together and start to begin to address what those workforce challenges are going to be. And I actually do want to acknowledge one of my colleagues in the room, Katie Branson, who's done a tremendous job helping shape up this coalition along with us. So it's important for me to say that industry is taking a very humble approach. You may not always hear that with corporate America, but we're taking a humble approach here. And what I mean by that is we want to ensure that we are convening all of the stakeholders that have interest in this topic. And what I mean by that is we want all levels of government present at the table. Federal, state, and local officials having the conversation. We want to ensure that labor is at the table. We want our community colleges and our universities and our think tanks like Aspen at the table with us as well, beginning to understand what are the implications of autonomous vehicles on our workforce. So that's one of our primary objectives as PTIO, the Partnership for Transportation, Innovation, and Opportunity. I'm sorry if I didn't give you the name earlier of our new coalition. So one thing we want to ensure that we're doing as well is that we're really taking a we're really developing a data-driven understanding of autonomous vehicles. So that's going to include doing a lot of research and continuing to have those tough conversations with the stakeholders that I mentioned. And from there, at that point, we can begin to develop some solid public policies in partnership with you all, with the Hill, with staffers, to understand how do we ensure that autonomous vehicles can actually benefit all workers, because it's actually it's possible. I do believe this, and PTIO believes this. So this is why we're working so diligently on this issue right now. And I also want to underscore too that we do have some time. I don't want you to be concerned that autonomous vehicles are going to take over the world tomorrow and that everyone is going to be displaced. We are going to see workforce transitions over time. There will be new jobs created as a result of the technology, and then existing jobs are going to look a little bit different than they used to look. So lastly, it's really incumbent, I would say, upon us as industry, as members of PTIO and other autonomous vehicle providers, to ensure that we are sharing information with you all. That is absolutely critical. And the type of information I'm referring to is, hey, Ford, what are some of the existing jobs that have been created as a result of autonomous vehicles? What are some of the near-term jobs that you anticipate may come down the pipeline in, let's say, 3 years, 5 years? So one thing I want to briefly discuss with you is just give you a brief anecdote from a Ford perspective. So when we talk about new jobs, our labor partners, you all know the UAW, and we love them. They are actually building our autonomous vehicles. In Flat Rock, Michigan, it's about 20 miles outside of Detroit. They're building those products. So that's one, job retention. Two, there's going to be another set of upskilling that's going to happen in order to ensure that those vehicles are properly maintained, all the sensors, the LiDAR, all of those things in those vehicles work properly. Secondly, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about, we launched our very first autonomous vehicle pilot in Miami this past February. And as a result of that pilot, we learned a lot ourselves. We learned, wow, here are some existing jobs that we need today in order to advance this technology safely. So I'm going to give you a few examples of that. I will tell you that Ford intends to have fully autonomous vehicles on the road by 2021. So between now and 2021, all of our autonomous vehicles and many of our partners in the PTIO group have 2 safety operators in the vehicle right now. So what I mean by that is there's a person that's behind the wheel, and their job is strictly to monitor the road and monitor the environment around the vehicle. The person in the passenger seat will have a laptop in his or her lap, and they're actually monitoring the self-driving system. They're monitoring all of the technology in the vehicle to make sure that it's functioning properly. Those are two jobs. And I would tell you right now that those jobs do not require a college degree. So when I think about my father, who was a taxi cab driver, in the event that taxi cab driver is displaced, how do we ensure that we are getting the word out to our taxi cab drivers to let them know there is a future for you? There's a future for you at Ford or at Daimler or at Toyota or wherever else, to continue working on this very exciting technology that at the end of the day is going to ultimately save a lot of lives. And
2021.
And that's Ford's goal, I'll say that specifically.
But Ford isn't going to have the cars by 2021.
We will still have vehicles. That's still what we do. It's still bread and butter. So another example I would give you is our pilot in Miami is delivering goods. We don't necessarily, at least on the front end, anticipate that there will be single ownership of autonomous vehicles. We envision autonomous vehicles in a fleet capacity. So in Miami, our vehicles are actually delivering Domino's pizza. I like pizza, I don't know about you. But with that, there will be a high utilization rate. And what I mean by that is autonomous vehicles may be operating on the roads in, let's say, 6 to 8 hour shifts or so. And at some point, they're going to have to return to the AV terminal, the autonomous vehicle terminal, or the mothership, we like to call it, to ensure that the maintenance is happening. So that's a job in and of itself, and it's going to be a very important one, that this person will have to monitor the maintenance schedule for these vehicles and give them back. That job may or may not require a college degree, but it's incumbent upon us and members of PTIO to make sure that we are getting the information out to you so that you can share it with the people in your community, and we'll make a point to do that. So thank you so much for the time.
Okay, so I want to raise a couple of questions with the panelists before we turn it over to the audience here.
Spencer?
Yes.
How are we doing on time?
I checked in here, I think 12:10.
Is it okay with the audience to go to 12:10 because we want to do Q&A with you? All right.
Okay.
All right. We're good.
So let me just roll this into one question here for discussion, and so that we can move out to audience here. Next steps, right? That's the theme here. What are next steps? This is almost like a great, black political convention. We've got local leaders here. We've got people from companies here. We've got staffers from federal offices here. So on the local level, what should folks be doing in terms of next steps, right? At companies, people are concerned about the future of workers and black workers in companies. What should they be doing? And then also on the federal level, as the CBC moves into the next Congress in 2018 and 2020, what should priorities be in terms of next steps? And I just kind of open that up generally.
I'm happy to take a first crack.
Yep.
So I think, is this on? Can you guys hear me? I'll just start with the local and then let others jump in. But I think a critical question for local leaders is understanding the workforce that you have in your community, what skills they have, how those skills could potentially translate to other jobs, understanding the employers in your area, and I think as Chanel was mentioning, understanding what their jobs are now and what their jobs will be over the next 5 years, so that you can map the skills of your community to what the job openings are going to be over the next 5 years. Because I think a challenge, and it shouldn't surprise anybody, again, if you are a cab driver and you've been driving a cab for 10 years, it's not easy to say to yourself, oh, what am I going to go do next? Like, where do I go? What skills should I obtain? What certification? There are thousands of certifications that you can go get. So understanding what certification you should get, I think, is the hardest part of this for people who are not on the quote-unquote traditional pathway. It's one thing if you are going to high school, to community college, you're moving through a system, you're moving through a pathway, but if you have hopped off that pathway and you need to then figure out how to get back on, that is a very challenging thing to do. And again, having your local leaders help you understand the skills that are necessary and how that can translate to a job is a critical component of this. And so I just encourage local leaders to focus on those two aspects of, again, how you connect people to the skills and work that those skills can potentially bring.
What jurisdictions are doing that well?
Well, the one, Congressman Rochester knows a little bit about this. I think Colorado, I think, is doing a tremendous job. I mentioned it in my remarks. They have a project called Skillful, where they are going throughout the state and talking to employers about the skills that, not the credentials, but the skills that they need for the jobs that they have open today. They then create a network that includes training providers. So that's another critical component for local leaders. What training providers are in your community? What skills can they train people to have that, again, will translate to a job? Skillful does the three parts of this. They talk to employers, what skills do you need? They go to training providers and say, hey, we need these skills for our employees, can you provide them? And then they communicate back to the workers to say, this is what our employers have told us, here are the training providers, if you want this job, go to this training provider and you'll be able to get a job with this company. So Skillful is a model, they're expanding it to 20 other states, so I think that's a good model to take a look at.
I think partnerships are absolutely crucial at every level that you mentioned. So we need to come together from across the spectrum, and including healthcare as well as the other businesses. And I think we have to find ways to invest in programs that help develop the workforce of the future. So Delaware has had a very successful program called Delaware Pathways, where middle school students get the chance to enter into one of these pathways so that when they graduate from high school, they have a skill that will allow them to get a job that they can get paid for. And so finding ways to bring people together once the needs are assessed, to understand what are the programs that we need to develop, and really engage, I think, the future workforce early in thinking about how they do that work. The other partnerships I think that are crucial are the community colleges and the institutions of higher education. I mentioned the partnership with Del Tech. They've worked with us for gene editing, but cybersecurity, a huge issue for us. We need more people trained in cybersecurity. Can we quickly turn around a program that gets people a certificate that then gets them a job that's a well-paid job and essential to the future?
I just want to add, raise your hand if you consider yourself an advocate or if you do any civil rights or racial justice work. So great, because I do think that the additional piece with all of these things that you're hearing is going to be accountability, and really, right now it's important to have these pieces, but there is a challenge where we do have people, black people, who are qualified. That is not equally reflected in hiring. And so the way that changes is with accountability. We need to be held accountable, and we know that. But I think that what tends to happen, I've seen in my time at Google, is people are just kind of so excited to be in the room. You don't want to ruffle feathers. And I do think that if one of the models that I saw be so effective in my Urban League days was when the Urban League CEOs actually had an agreement with an employer. If we provide people with these skills, you will hire this many people. And it's really going to require that additional equity piece in addition to kind of just let's get some skills, let's get some roles, but actually doing that connectivity. You also asked about federal priorities, Spencer. I think that what the CBC has been focusing on for decades is the right set of issues, and it's really going to be around the tweaks to make it work for the 21st century economy. So not just, like we talked about, fixing those financial aid systems, so that the infrastructure that already exists can use them, tweaking the educational programming opportunities are going to be really important. And then just in terms of what's happening at companies, I think what is an important part of the conversation about diversity in the new economy is that there are still lots and lots of jobs that don't require a STEM background, all right? I'm an example. My background, I studied English and music in undergrad, and then I went to law school, and I work at Google, and I don't have technical skills, right? And nearly half of our workforce is similar. So remembering that as we create that kind of fluence and comfort level, build those relationships with these kind of new economy sectors, but remembering that there is still a variety of occupations available.
If I may just briefly add, I would encourage everyone to start to take a close look at the out-of-school space as an opportunity for workforce development. I say that because when you look at particularly communities of color, where we may not always have the same level of, work-based learning programs, workforce development opportunities during school hours, you can capture us during the out-of-school time, whether it's after school, before school, summer, or on weekends. So I would really encourage everyone to take a look at that. In industry, and Ford in particular, starting to look more closely at that space. How do we expose youth to our companies and to those new job opportunities during the out-of-school time?
Okay, so now we are going to go to the audience in terms of discussion. How many questions do we have right now? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Panelists, get out your papers and your pens. We're going to do 2 or 3 questions at a time and then respond. So as opposed to one, because we want to hear from as many people as possible. So we've got a mic going around, and we'll go 1, 2, 3 in terms of the questions, response, and then we'll do another 1, 2, 3. Now, we
And
gotta have a fast mic.
questions, that's right, questions, not speeches, okay?
Right.
All right, just saying.
So why don't we go ahead and start right here? Yep. And then we'll just pass the mic.
Who do I pass it to after me?
You can go right next to you. Yeah.
All right. Testing. Okay, so you can hear me. Well, hi. To do this quickly, I won't say the name of my company because I'm not here to make a speech, but we are deeply engaged with a respectable number of Fortune 50s, Fortune 100, right, Fortune 500, but that's not the public sector, or it doesn't represent all of the workforce. So to quickly frame this, I just want to say that the skills conversation we're having is very exciting, but I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on this. So knowing that many thought leaders have wrestled with the implications of underskilled and overskilled, and whether one is better than the other, I'd love to know where you fall in the spectrum of that conversation, whether you think it's a red herring or whether you feel one is better than the other. Whatever your perspective, I just want to hear where you fall and what you think the talk track should be. Okay?
All right, thank you. You got the notes here? All right.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Okoye. My perspective is to find out whether during the previous disruptions that we've experienced in terms of technology and all that, the older folks have been left behind. There's been age discrimination experienced in the private sector. Do companies now realize that the age discrimination is no longer going to be a factor regarding this particular disruption that we're about to experience? Because there are some people in their 60s that are even more committed than the folks in the millennial age if you give them the skills. So I just want to know your perspective on that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning. This is not a speech. The most horrifying data I heard this morning was the U.S. spends 0.3% of GDP on workforce. And I'm sure the Europeans spend maybe 1 or 2% perhaps. What can we do about this? Because the role of government is going to be critical in how we prepare tomorrow's workforce. That's one. My friend to my right talked about older workers. I run a national organization called Senior Service America. We're in the workforce development space. By 2025, the largest single segment of the workforce will be Americans who are 50 and over. But all the conversations thus far is focused on younger people. How do we create a more inclusive strategy around workforce development that includes older workers?
We're going to do one more. We'll have a little gender pair.
Okay. Quickly, I want to answer two of those questions. AARP has a 50-plus back to work program, and DC is a partner in that. But my question is, as it relates to DC, 97% of the population is insured. But folks aren't going to the doctor, especially Medicaid patients. And we have the largest Medicaid population in the country. But listening to the health person, I got really excited because there were so many opportunities for remote workers and home-based visitors to do, or employees to do XYZ. I'd like you to share some of the legalities of getting to that. Because here often they say, oh, it's not legal, we can't do long-distance treatment.
Okay, some quick thoughts. You don't have to answer everything, just kind of what pops into your mind in terms of 4 points that came up.
Very quickly, on underskilled or overskilled, I'm old school and I always think it's good to have more, especially for black folks, but I think that cost is critical. So if you're getting into tremendous debt with this, with your credentials and your degrees and things like that, I think that's not a good cost-benefit analysis. On age, I think those points were great, and we are actually thinking about that. Our Grow. If you go to grow.google, all those programs are designed to be for learners of any age, but obviously that's a deeper conversation. And in terms of workforce spending, honestly, I just think this is where, as advocates, there's going to be a need to drastically rethink how our country invests in workforce and in social safety net. I'm having a moment, but our head of Google X was recently in the office and just talking about, he thinks it's time for another GI Bill, the equivalent of the GI Bill. Like, it's going to take something of that kind, and that's a huge amount of political will, so it's going to take a huge amount of advocacy efforts and support for great people like the Congresswoman who is passionate about this, but that's just something that's going to have to come from the American people.
Sure. You want to jump in?
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I want to jump in here. I would agree with everything you said on the skills. I think that I did want to highlight, though, one of the reasons why we're doing this is because when I initially talked, I talked about all the groups, and that includes seniors. I actually had not run for Congress until I was over 50. I hadn't run for anything until I was over 50. And it was scary, and it was new. And so part of this process is really about saying whether you are returning to your community from prison, whether you are a vet, whether you are a person with a disability. When we were talking about, when Marie was talking about the autonomous vehicles, I was thinking about congestion and safety, but I was also thinking about people with disabilities who don't have access. I was thinking about seniors who feel sometimes dehumanized when somebody tells them you can't drive your own car anymore. These are issues, and the technology, as we talked about that technology, this is my passion. Part of my purpose in doing this is to get more passionate people about this. The most incredible thing I heard today, it's not too late. It's not too late. And that we as a whole country have to be investing in this. And so y'all might be the choir. I don't think so. I think we got some new people into the choir, because look, see, but we like they say, we are the change we waiting on. Right. This is happening to us now. And we can either be afraid or we can lean in. Yep. And we can take the bull by the horns and say, we're going to have accountability. We can take the bull by the horns and say, we know the data, and we're going to say to our communities and our government, this is our country. We need to invest in this, or we fall farther and farther behind. So to your questions, it's for all of us. This is for all of us. Seniors right now are going bankrupt because of our pension systems. So when we talk about that social contract, the contract is, we used to have a contract. You do the right thing. You go to work. You get a job. You get benefits. You retire, and they really pay you. We've got to change and adapt with it. And so that's really why we are here. And your presence
I'm so glad to see you. Like I said last year, we didn't have P. Diddy on the panel, but you showed up. This is important, and we really appreciate you. I'll turn it back. I'm sorry I was on my little soapbox, my little future work soapbox.
That's tough to follow, but I did. So I think we have a moral imperative to think differently about how we care for people on Medicaid. And I think there's a huge opportunity to deploy innovation, both in terms of how we care and the kind of technology that we deploy, that frankly will improve health and make care more affordable. There's a collaborative that's formed recently, brought together by a company called Avia. It's 17 leading health systems. We're one of them. We're working with Andy Slavitt, former CMS director, to really think collectively about how we can deploy new ways of thinking, new technology to support some of our most vulnerable citizens. The other thing I would say is that one of the most important social determinants of health is loneliness. And, you think about how we can, the importance of work in making connections and how that impacts health. I think there's a huge opportunity and component there, becomes particularly important as people age. And with regard to the first question, we need some of the barriers that we get into, I think you mentioned, are licensing and regulatory barriers. Those are problems that we can solve. We just have to think differently and have the will to do differently.
Okay, Alan Marie, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few more questions, and then we're going to come back for final comments from folks in response, and you can respond to rounds 1 and 2 here.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and I'm so happy you mentioned about pension benefits regarding those persons who are retired. But also my concern has to do with the health benefits and prescription benefits. Because many persons are being impacted with companies no longer paying any of those things. So how can you all assist with that?
Thank you so much. Here.
Hi, my name is Naisha Black. I have an economics background, and I'm also trained as a demographer and a sociologist. So I borrow from all of those disciplines in my thinking. And so there has been quite a bit of conversation about older workers and as well as the skills mismatch, but I'm also thinking about a spatial mismatch. And from an economic perspective, which is flawed, people will move where the money is, but there's also place attachment and these social and psychological issues in which people may not move. And we know that capital, which is labor, needs to be mobile in this 21st century. So how do we address some of those social, emotional, and psychological issues around people not being spatially proximate to where the jobs are?
All right, so we're going to keep it short here.
Hey, Uduak Joe, I'm from Long Beach, California. I serve on our local college board, and these changes are coming so fast. How can, and we know government moves slow, especially at the federal level. How can we adapt together to make sure that we're putting the right programs in place soon enough so by the time we develop it, it might be outdated? It's really hard to keep track and make sure we're staying ahead of the curve.
That's a good question, too. Good point.
2 quick questions. My name is Brian Cartwright. Yeah, good. Well, 50% of German's workforce has attained their opportunity through apprenticeships. We hadn't talked about that today. What pathways would an individual have to gain opportunity through apprenticeship and also toward independent entrepreneurship and ownership of their means of income?
Hi, good morning. My name is Lindsay, and I'm a contract supporter for Google Cloud. And my interest question is to talk about preparation for the future in regards to retirement and economic opportunities when people are working in multiple contracting roles through Lyft, Airbnb, and other entrepreneurial endeavors, and not really having organizations to look at to prepare for their future since it's not internal.
Okay, and I hope you guys have been taking notes. I'm about to come back up. We'll go one more back up in front.
And very quickly, thank you all for your wonderful presentation. Congresswoman, I don't know if your website would allow us to continue the conversation and continue to work as a team with all of us in this room to be able to access your information, the panelists' information, so that we can continue to work together because we feel the stress of time.
Great. Great.
And go ahead.
Good point.
And Let's do two quick ones, quick.
Hi, I'm Dr. Corte from AARP, and my question, even though we serve the 50-plus population, we are also laser focused on more intergenerational strategies. Through an intergenerational lens, what keeps you up at night, particularly as it relates to African American Black folks across the country?
Good morning. My name is Naja Daniels. I bring greetings from Run for Something PAC. My question is in regards to solar and clean energy jobs as we continue to look forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down the list just right here, and we will end with the Congresswoman. So Marie, we'll let you start, and we'll just go down the row.
Okay, so I'm going to try to tackle the apprenticeship question by the gentleman a little bit, and also what sort of keeps us up at night through that intergenerational lens, if I'm understanding your question. So I will share with you that by 2020, 55% of our skilled tradesmen at our plants across the country, the U.S., will be eligible to retire. 55%. That's crazy. Wow. So intergenerationally speaking, we have to really figure out how do we make a point to reach out to young people or to the older generation that really wants to get back into the workforce. We've got to figure that out. And maybe touching on the gentleman who said that we move too slowly, we absolutely move too slowly. Yes?
I'm tweeting away here. The stats, one more time.
55% of our skilled tradesmen are eligible to retire by 2020. I'll also add to that Ford, we're maybe a little bit luckier. And why I say that is because we have a wait list of existing employees that want to be skilled tradesmen. We've got about 2,000 people on that wait list. However, that's just one small anecdote. When you look at the broader industry, this is a systemic problem. Our suppliers, they tell me, Marie, by 2020, 100% of our skilled tradesmen are eligible to retire.
Wow.
Okay, so this is a big problem. This is why we have to move really quickly. We've got to partner very, very closely with the government at all levels to make sure we're getting out the information about these awesome careers. Okay?
Dr. Neville?
I'll just be very brief. I think the partnership aspect of this is absolutely key. We have to deeply understand our needs. In order to do that, we have to deeply engage with people in our communities, and then we have to work together across the community to come up with solutions. I don't think we can wait to see what happens. I think we have to work together to create our future. It's not just about technology. Technology enables people to do their work ideally better, but it may be different, and we have to be aware of that impact and support people. I mentioned that we're the largest private employer in the state. Some of the most poignant moments I have when I go out and talk to our caregivers, it's to hear someone say, "This job saved my life. This job gave me the dignity that I need. This job helps me feed my family." And I can tell you that that's something that weighs on me every single day.
I would just say in terms of keeping up, which I think is super challenging, that going back to the point that it's not too late, I think what may be even more important is really doing the research from both a kind of academic rigor perspective, but also just data and analysis and looking at the real life scenarios in which you're involved at a programmatic level to innovate the way Spencer talked about when you see the future coming. I still think that there is a great need for the big ideas that have not yet been surfaced, particularly for serving our communities. So I wouldn't focus as much energy on kind of trying to catch up as much as really thinking ahead, because if the real opportunity is real, the opportunity will be to actually leapfrog over where everyone else is and think about the future. And then really quickly on intergenerational, I think for me it's really around, I think about, we've been working on translating a lot of our learning curriculums into Spanish, and one of the challenges is that the children, as we know often of multilingual families, are the ones that translate for the parents. That is very much the case we're seeing also for technology. Kids just have that comfort level. We all know, right? The 2-year-olds in our lives can do more with these than we can. And in order to really help our children to have the fluency that they need with technology, we need to know some things. If they're just teaching us, I think it's clear kind of how far back we are. So I would encourage you again, go to grow.google, take the digital literacy curriculums. There's a whole long set of programs that you can go through. It's grow.google or google.com/grow, whichever one. So those are the 2 key points I'd make.
Okay, Al, and then Congresswoman Blunt Rochester is going to close us out.
Sounds good. I'll just go back to, I think, the first question about underskill versus overskill. For me, it's about the right skills. And the stat that kind of jumped out, I'm sorry, can you hear? I was just saying, the underskill, overskill debate, to me, it's about the right skills. A stat that jumped out to me and gave me some pause was, this is Burning Glass again. They looked at all the credentials that you can go to a school and obtain, a training provider. 75% of those right now are not being valued by employers. So that is a scary fact, which is you do not want people going and paying a lot of money to get a skill that has no value among employers. So again, I think it's about understanding what credentials have value in the labor market today. The second question I'll just address, and then I'll turn it over to the Congresswoman, is the stat, 0.03% of our GDP is being spent on training, right? That does give me pause as well. I think there's a number of things that we should think about to try to reverse that trend. I'll just give 3 quick examples. We have something called trade adjustment assistance. It only applies to people who lose their job due to trade. Have we been talking about trade today? No, we've been talking about automation. So if we can modify, update, modernize that program so that people can take benefit from that program if they lose their job due to automation, we would be doing something to reverse that trend. We have a 401k for many people, not enough, but we have 401ks. Do we have anything like that where you get an employer contributing to an account that you can use for training over the course of your life? We don't. Right? And so what we need to do is try and create something similar to that. We give a tax credit for companies to invest in research and development. They don't get a tax credit to invest in their workers. Can we provide something, a human capital tax credit, so employers are investing in their workers as opposed to just investing in new plant and equipment? So those are 3 quick ideas. I think all of them would be helpful in terms of reversing that trend.
Okay, so I get to close it out. First of all, I want to thank this incredible panel, and I want to thank all of the team all around this room, the staff that made this possible. Please let's give them a round of applause. I would like to acknowledge that my dad passed me his question on a piece of paper, which was a good one. Can we re-engineer our K-12 school system for future jobs and employment? So that's a good question. And I want to first say, hopefully we have all of your emails. We were taking emails because the gentleman who suggested we keep this going, and that those of you who felt that you understood how important this is, we want to keep in touch with you, and we want to make sure if you need the slides. Last year's session was videotaped, and it is on the CBCF website. This one will be as well. So again, if you want to go back and look at that one, and also for this one. But I'll tell you, there were so many issues that just came up in that round of questions. Health and prescriptions, and the fact that we are just fighting to keep the Affordable Care Act. How incredible is that, when we really should be talking about health care for everybody? That's incredible to me, and that's one of the areas I wanted to be on the Education and Workforce Committee, because I got a chance to serve on, which I'm on, the Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee. Labor, health, pensions, that's important. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was mentioned that we hadn't talked about, and it's kind of an interesting thing, this whole spatial mismatch. People are probably like, what does that mean? I think what I got from it is the whole fact that there may be jobs over here, but the people live over here, and they feel comfortable about the neighborhood that they've lived in their whole life and don't want to move. But there are also ideas and concepts out there for helping to relocate people and give them incentives. And also, if we look at technology and ways that we can use technology, maybe a person could work from where they are. So there are opportunities there. The issue about slow to adapt as a country or as the federal government. I started off as an intern in a congressional office back in 1987. And to be back here it is incredible. And I will tell you, the passion that you see, this energy that you see, it's not about, first of all, we just left the prayer breakfast, so I'm going to acknowledge this came from God, but also, it ties to the question of what keeps me up at night. It's a sense of urgency. And what I want you to walk out of this room with, whether you're talking about apprenticeships, which we know Germany and Switzerland and other countries do it differently and better because it's part of their DNA. Here, we told our kids, I want you to be a doctor, I want you to be a lawyer, not a plumber. I wanted my daughter to be a plumber. She's a social worker, which is even better. Hey, social workers are great. But that's part of their DNA, and that's part of the change that we have to make as a society. You talked about retirement. You talked about the contractors who are out there doing these jobs. Where's their social contract? Where's their safety net? And not just the safety net. People they're earning this. They're working. Part of what I've been able to do with our team is to raise and highlight this issue. And we just got approval this year, and we will be launching a Future of Work caucus in the Congress. It will be bipartisan because we have got to come together as a country. That's what keeps me up at night, that we are so divided. And that the pendulum will swing back and forth and back and forth, and we will never get into real problem solving until we come together. So the next time we come back here, you guys, you're the ambassadors. Next year, God willing, I come back. Next year, this room should be full. It should be full of more ambassadors. If anything else, if you do nothing else, walk out of this room with a renewed sense of who we are as a country, where we're trying to go, and that the future is now, and that you are the ambassadors that are going to make this shift happen faster. Not turn a big ship like we typically do in the federal government. Al asked me in one of our Future of Work, I'm on the Aspen Institute's Future of Work task force, and the only member of Congress for representing the House, and he asked, should this be incremental changes, a program here, a program there, or should it be bold? It should be both. We need both. The programs that were talked about here and the examples that are happening are pilots and ideas, but we've got to go to scale. And looking at our K-12 systems is bold. That's what we need, to be bold. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for participating. Make sure you're on our email list. Make sure you come back here next year and bring an army with you, because the future of work is now.